Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Explode Your Expert Business Show. And today I'm here with the one and only Winston Clement. How you doing, Winston?
Good, Simone. How are you doing today?
I am incredibly well. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to have you here on our show. We are going to talk about Black Lives Matter. We are going to talk about diversity, inclusion. We are going to talk about practical things that we can do as a society
hmm
to move forward. And so I would love to hear from you first. If you can give us a bit more of a background about yourself, that will be a great start of the conversation.
Yeah, shall I do the 30-second background or the 1.5 hour keynote?
Let's do you have something in between, like 3 minutes? I think 30 seconds is not gonna give you justice, and 1.5 hour, I don't think we have enough time. So
That's a good point. That's a valid point. So, okay, I think so let me start here. Maybe the thing that makes me a little bit unique, I don't know if guys can see me that well, but I'm actually a wheelchair user. And that's because I was born with a condition called osteogenesis imperfecta. So there's going to be a quiz at the end. Make sure you remember that name. And what that condition is basically brittle bones disorder. So growing up, well, it's just what it says on the tins. My bones would break quite easily. I think we worked out that by the age of 12, I'd broken 150 bones, which is a
wow.
lot. And I'm sure you'll appreciate that, Simone, because you play sports, so you've probably had a few injuries.
I broke 3,
Okay,
and
yeah,
it
so
was and it was painful. I
yeah,
can't even
it's not fun.
imagine. Oh my God. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in the hundreds now. I think by now I'm probably over 200 in total. And so that was a big part of my story, especially when I was younger. And it was happening quite frequently. And
Yeah.
then kind of fast forwarding a bit, and we can jump into specifics. I, I still went to school, actually, my parents decided to send me to a mainstream school, which is just a regular school here in the UK. And so a lot of my friends, all my friends were able-bodied. I didn't really know anyone else in a wheelchair until I was much older. And also because I grew up in West London, it was predominantly Asian school. So I
Yeah.
tended to be the only black kid in the classroom, or maybe sometimes there were one or two others, but 85% of my school was Asian. So even today, a lot of my friends, people that I call childhood friends, are Asian. And then went to uni, did computer science. We were talking about technology earlier, so I could have probably helped you when
Yeah.
you were having issues, but I chose not to, chose to watch you struggle. And did that, and then I went into a corporate career, which lasted about maybe 8 to 10 years, where I was mostly doing programming and working for various big companies in financial services. And what else did I do? And consulting, management consulting. And then and then came the big change when I decided that I didn't want to be an IT geek anymore. I wanted to become a motivational speaker. And again, there's a story there which we can come back to.
We'll come
And
back to that.
so,
Yeah.
yeah. And so nowadays, what I do is I work with companies predominantly, teaching on diversity and inclusion, teaching
Mhm.
on how they can attract people from diverse backgrounds, like myself, Black and disabled. Those
Mhm.
intersections are also important. And yeah, so creating training, creating keynotes. I did, like I was saying to you before the recording, I was speaking at a big conference yesterday for CIPD, which is a massive HR conference
Yeah.
on this particular topic. So it's what I love to do, and it's my new passion, even more than being an IT geek. So I think that was sort of the 3 4 minute version. But yeah, we can dive
Uh,
into stuff.
we can definitely dive into stuff, in particular around the intersection, as you mentioned,
hmm
because
hmm
as a society, kind of, we need labels to make sense of the word. So even if I've never liked to say, oh, like, label someone, oh, disabled, black, white, is something that, as I am, I have to consciously do, because I just believe that at the end of the day, we are all human beings.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was having a lot of conversations, in particular in this time around the Black Lives Matter movement and what happens. And one of the things I realized is that not actually giving a label can have the opposite effect, because it becomes a way of, like, you're not acknowledging my difference, you're not acknowledging me as who I am. And I have a lot of black friends, or talking to my wife as well, which is Caribbean, and they say the moment you don't acknowledge my blackness is the moment you don't acknowledge me. And you know, as a white man, that's why I'm having a lot of conversation right now. I'm labeled an able white man. I mean, there are a lot of things that I will never have to experience in life, just because of who I am. So it's great. What I'm trying to do right now is to understand more and more different backgrounds, different things that other people actually had to go through. So we'd love to know from you, from your perspective, how was it for you growing up? If we are focusing as well, even on your condition and on the fact that you're black.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually wasn't born in the UK. So I was born in Kenya, East Africa. So, you know, the first 10 years of my life, that's where I lived and that's where I grew up. So
Right.
I sometimes feel like I've lived two different lives, because there was the first 10 years and then the other 20 years, like part two. And when I moved to the UK, that is. And so, you know, when I moved to the UK, I think that's when I started to become aware of just my blackness. There's no other way to say it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, back home in Kenya, everyone was black. Being black wasn't a topic. It was just like being a human being is not a topic, because we're just all the same, right?
Yeah.
So it's only
Yeah.
like, oh, and I remember saying to my mom that, oh my God, my school, I'm probably one of very few black people in my school, black kids. And so it was an interesting experience. And then I think when it comes to racism as well, like, and maybe, or maybe not even racism might be strong, but just in terms of being attacked for my skin color, first of all, I can't say that, you know, I've ever had anybody come up to me and say, you're this, you're that, you know, calling me all these names. I've not had those overt expressions of racism, but, you know, there have been experiences which, when I look back now, I didn't really understand at the time, but when I look back now, it's what, and this is again another label which helped me understand what was happening. There were microaggressions, right? And, you know, a microaggression, for example, you know, in the school, and like I said, my friends mostly Asian, and again, there's an education piece here as well. I don't feel like any of the people that I grew up with were innately racist, but because I spent time with them, and obviously at times they'll be speaking in their language, and I would hear how they'd refer to me, how they'd refer to other black people. And, you know, it could be just a simple term as, I think in Punjabi, to refer to a black person, they say kala. So like, I'd show up to like hang out with my friends for dinner, and they'll be like, oh yeah, Kala's here. Hey, come join us. Come join us. Right? And it translated in English, that would literally be saying, black is here. Right? Which, you know, I don't know how comfortable we would be expressing that way in English, right?
Yeah.
And so that was sort of in like the high school growing up context. And then at work, an example of a microaggression would be, because I like my African food, Simone, and so.
What's your
And I
favorite
don't,
one?
so many, where do I start? So this particular dish that I was taking to work that day is called ugali, which I recommend you look up, and it's basically, how do you describe? So if you know maize, so you take
Mm-hmm.
maize and you grind it up into almost like a powder.
Right.
What you do with that powder, it becomes like flour, and then that flour you put it in water,
Mm-hmm.
and then it gets shaped into almost like a cake, and you have it like quite warm,
Mm-hmm.
and normally you have it with your vegetables and your
Right.
curries and stuff like that. It's really cool. I think West Africa have a version of it called fufu, perhaps is more familiar.
Right. Yeah, I
But
heard about that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
I
yeah,
got it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I took this ugali thing to work, and I was excited, Simone. I was like, lunchtime, going down, can't wait. And I remember I was sitting, this is a big company, we're all sitting down, everyone's having their sandwiches, their sausage rolls, you
Mm.
know, whatever they have, their crisps, whatever. And I'm like pulling out my ugali, and, I think I had some veggies with it as well.
Right.
And I think initially it was curiosity. It was like, hey, Winston, just like if I pulled it out in front of you, you'd be like, hey, what's that? I've not seen that before. And then, but I think there's a point where curiosity can also become a microaggression.
Mm.
So what happened was, maybe 2 weeks after that first time, I brought the same dish into work again,
Right.
right? And then the same person who asked me, what was that thing that you were having last week? He asked me the same question again. But this time he said it in a way that it just didn't feel comfortable. He was like, oh, Winston's brought that African dish. Winston, what's it called again? And at the time I didn't think anything of it,
Yeah.
but you can see that the tone and like the feeling is slightly different when you've already explained it to somebody once, and then this time also they're doing it in front of a group and trying to make a bit of a show of it. So
Yeah.
those microaggressions are things that we often overlook, but I think for most people, I don't have any data on this, these are the more frequent experiences of being
Mm.
assessed for your background.
That's what I've been that's what I've been hearing as well, to confirm what you've said. And I actually did an interview for the BBC a few days ago, and they were looking for a white person that had racist behaviors without even knowing them. And the more I got to know more about the Black culture, talking about all my extended family is Black. So I had a lot of conversation with my wife, with other family members, because I want to understand. And another reason why I want to understand is that my kids are going to be mixed race. So they are going to be in a world which I would no clue about what they're going to, how they're going to be seen.
Mm,
And so for me, having even having a basic awareness, even if it's theoretical and not empirical, practical, is a must. Like there is no other way.
yeah.
And so I did this interview for the BBC, and I remember that one of the things that I was doing that I didn't think it was racist, but actually in hindsight it was that we had only in our class when I was 12 or 13, we only had one guy from Morocco. Everyone else
Mm-hmm.
was white Italian, and there was this only guy from Morocco. And there were very few families at that time. They were coming from Morocco to work in Italy, in our town. And we kept calling it, the Moroccan guy, Marocchino. That's how we're calling it in Italian. Or we were always making fun about his smell because he had a different smell compared to us. Or we were making jokes about the way he was speaking Italian. I mean, kudos to him. He actually came to a new country and learned the language. I understood it when I came here to the UK and I couldn't speak English. So, and from Moroccan to Italian is even more difficult than from Italian to English. So there is all these things that I was doing just because everyone else was doing them. And for me, I didn't have any intention of offending someone at that time, but I'm sure I did
Mm,
because
mm,
of just the environment. So what the question I want to ask is, how does the environment or society as it's shaped creates those situations?
Mm. Yeah, it's a good point. And by the way, like I think this is human behavior. This is, I wouldn't say, generally speaking, I wouldn't say, for example, with the microaggression example that I gave when I was at school, or even with your example with your Moroccan friend, this is an environment plays a big part because you just tend to go with what's accepted in your world.
Right.
And you know, when you're in school, the, the school is your whole world, right? It's
Yes,
literally
it
like
is.
you don't travel and you know see other places, other countries very often. You know, 9 times out of 10, you're just either with your family or with
Yeah.
your friends at school, right?
Yeah.
And that's all you know. And so if at home, for example, to use my Indian friends, because I know they won't mind me saying this, you know, if at home their parents or their grandparents are referring to black people as kalu, right? That is all they know. So you come out and you're like, oh yeah, I have one of those people
Yeah.
in my circle. So it's
Yeah.
just automatic to refer to him in that way, right? And so what I really like about the latest, because there's been many attempts, you know, with this Black Lives Matter, with raising racial inequalities and trying to have a real change and a real
Mm.
transformation. Because to be honest, where we are today, it's just not good enough. But what
Yeah.
I really like about it this time is the whole idea of calling out that behavior, right?
Yes.
Because I feel the responsibility is on both parties. So it was my responsibility back then to say, hey, by the way, now that I know what Kalu means, I don't like you referring to
Mm.
me in that way, right? And just like now when I've given them that education piece, it's up to them to go and educate their parents, educate their grandma, and say, actually, you know what? In today's world, it's not okay to refer to people from that culture in that way. It's
Yes.
offensive, right? And so that's what I really like. And even with organizations at the moment, you know, with the movement, we are asking people not to. It's no longer good enough, Simone, to say to not be racist, right? It's no longer good enough.
Hmm.
You have to be anti-racist,
Yeah.
right? And so anti-racist looks like if you're an individual, like I said, calling out that behavior at home or amongst your colleagues, whatever, when you see something inappropriate happening. But even as a company,
Mm.
and I'm part of many organizations, we're both part of the PSA.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting seeing how different organizations have responded and the organizations that have been prepared to get uncomfortable
Yeah.
in order to state their position on this racial inequality. And I think for those organizations that have decided to stay quiet, I wouldn't automatically label them as racist, just
Hmm.
like I wouldn't label the people as racist,
Yeah.
because it's such a complex world to navigate. And often it's because people are afraid of saying the wrong thing. And maybe you've been in this position as a white man, and you know, I commend you for speaking on this issue because it's not easy. Like there's 100 different ways you could get this wrong, right?
There
And
is, and I got it, and probably I got it wrong about 101 ways. Now, one of the ways I got it incredibly wrong was, and again, that came from ignorance. I did a stand-up comedy gig a few years
mm,
ago, and the um, the title of the comedy gig, and it was all around "I wish I was black." Now, for me, it was funny. And if someone knows me, no, I play basketball. We are three white people in our basketball team. So uh, my extended family is black, and growing up, I've always been around black people. It's like, I don't even know how I find myself in that situation, but it has been something natural to me. And so I played on black stereotypes because I also listen. Some of my favorite stand-up comedians are black. And so make it a mix of that. I played on stereotypes that I've heard on other stand-up comedies. They were funny, missing the point that the person who said that message was actually black and not a white man. So a lot of people found it really funny. A lot of people found it really funny, and a lot of black people said, oh my God, it was hilarious, well done. But then I had other people that saw that video and they found it really distasteful. And I remember my sister-in-law, and she's really passionate into Black history. She explained why certain reference I was making, they related, for example, to the period of slavery. One of the jokes that I had was that, that a lot of, there is a stereotype of the black father leaving the house. But I didn't know why the stereotype was. And when I understood that the real reason why was because they were actually enslaved, and so they didn't know how to integrate anymore in the family, then I felt incredibly crap about myself, first of all, for even saying that. But I think that that's the only way, by talking about these topics right now, by having this conversation, that's the only way in which we can come to a more mutual agreement.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you raise a really good point about stereotypes. And yeah, first of all, you're not the only person to mess up many times, but at least you, when you were given the education, you took it on board and you tried to do something with it. And what I wanted to say about stereotypes, so yeah, so stereotypes play a big part, I think, because, and again, to go back to my own story, so I am a little bit unique, right? And if you look at historically, if you read Malcolm X, if you read Black history, like, how you said your sister-in-law does, there are certain stereotypes about Black people, even in terms of how they are perceived as a threat. I'm thinking about Black men in particular. So you have this image of a Black guy, 6 foot plus, muscly, and, the thug looking type who, when you see him walking on the sidewalk, you're supposed to cross the road because he's going to do something to you, right? And so I have obviously relatives, cousins, people in my circle who are Black men who fit that stereotype, who are 6 foot and muscly, but they happen to be good people and have professional jobs, etc. But so, for example, my cousin, he's definitely, he definitely has that look that has been stereotyped. And I remember many years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, he used to drive. He just loved BMWs. He's always loved BMWs, even growing up. Always talked about BMWs. As soon as he got a job, the first car he bought was a BMW. And it's like, kudos to him. You've worked, you've saved your money, you bought a Beamer. Nice. Now I want to buy mine now. How did you do it, cousin? Right? But honestly, that BMW turned out to be one of the biggest curses of his life. He would literally get stopped by the cops almost every other day. Like, no joke. Almost
Black man
every other
on a
day, because
black man on a BMW.
Black man, he's young, he's in his early 20s, he's got that look, he's a big guy, he looks strong, he's driving an expensive car, he's got to be a drug dealer. What else? Like, he has to be a drug dealer, right? And there's been similar experiences with, a few other of my male relatives. And so for me, when I say I haven't received overt racism, I think partly there's a environmental thing, because I grew up maybe around a different community, Asian mostly, but also because with my story, so I'm not a 6 foot Black guy. I promise you, if you don't believe me, go on my website for those who haven't seen it. I'm maybe half of that. And so in a way, and this again, this is Winston speculating, because I don't fit into that mold, I'm not seen as much of a threat, right? So if you see me walking down the pavement, You don't need to cross the road. It's only Winston. He's all right. He's one of those cool black people that we don't
Yeah.
need to run
You
away
don't need to
from.
worry about. Mhm.
Yeah, he's harmless. And so that's why I'm quite, when I speak on diversity and stuff, I think it's also really important to recognize what the different intersections are, which is the thing that I mentioned at the beginning,
Yeah.
because a black and black male disabled experience is different from just a black male experience. And likewise, you have black
Mm.
female, and black isn't just black. You could have black African,
Yeah.
black Caribbean. It's very, very diverse. And I think as soon as we start recognizing those, what all of those strands are, the more we can actually help people in the way that they need to be helped, because it's not all
Yeah.
generic.
It looks extremely complex because now if you think about, now that you made me think about it, if we think about how many intersections there are, hundreds of thousands. I mean, we take in consideration all the different factors that we can consider. So how can people, organization navigate such a complex word, still showing compassion, still showing willing of understanding, to find a more like a common place where we can come together, we can understand better each other. So where do we start?
Yeah, gosh. So I think maybe we'll do like an individual level and then organization level.
Right.
So and to be honest, a lot of the tips will apply for both actually. So first of all, it's communication. And by communication, I don't just mean like generic, oh yeah, like Black Lives Matter, I use the hashtag on your Facebook or your LinkedIn page, and then that's it. I mean, actually having real conversations,
Yeah.
whether it's at home with your colleagues,
Yeah.
with your extended family, whatever, and being prepared to call things out, like I was saying earlier. Like if it's inappropriate, then and you don't call it out, then you are complicit. You are creating a safe space for that prejudice to carry on.
Yeah.
So we definitely need to move from that and into being anti-racist. And with that comes this idea of allies. So allies are people who I believe an ally is a leader, right? So in an organization that would look like, you know, the head of the organization, the CEO, the managing director, and for them to again come out and be prepared to have those uncomfortable conversations about race and inequality and prejudice, because when they do it, then it gives permission for everyone else in the organization to say, hey, I might not get it right the first time, but I'm prepared to listen, I'm prepared to talk
Yeah.
and to grow and learn, right? So an ally who's at the top of an organization, I believe, does a lot of good work when they are prepared to put themselves forward and make themselves vulnerable, because as you've experienced, there's so many ways to get it wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so that's at the organization level. And then there's people in our world, personal development, right? We have platforms, we have followers, we have people in our communities. And again, it's the same thing, exactly what you're doing now. Now that you're having this series of conversations on Black Lives Matter, then I'm sure it's already sparked questions, it's already sparked
Yeah.
new conversations within your Facebook groups, etc. Right? And people wanting to learn more, people saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe I used to do that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to be better, right? I want to be better." So that's important as well. And yeah, and I mean, those are some of the tips I can think of. And the other thing I would add as well is, if you are in a position to speak on these topics, right? Because you don't need 100 people to, sorry, 100,000 people in order to evoke change. Because what I often hear from people is saying, oh yeah, but I only have 100 followers, right? It should be
Yeah.
up to the celebrities, it should be up to
Yeah.
all the
Yeah. Yeah.
A-list
Yeah.
celebrities like Simone talking about it, right? And, I say to
Sure.
them, hey, look, even if you've got 50 followers and only 10 of them receive that message, then that's 10 more people than there were yesterday. right, who built up this
Yeah.
consciousness. So yeah, so a lot of it is around comms, and a lot of it is around calling things out. And it takes guts. It's not easy, by the way, guys. And I have to do this as well when it comes to other communities, because I can't be the guy who speaks on diversity and inclusion, but isn't aware of other communities as well, or people with
Yeah.
different sexual preferences, etc. Because the same prejudices exist for all the diversity strands.
It is fascinating, this conversation, and it is a not an easy conversation to have. But there are I come the only way I can comment is from the white perspective, as a white man, and what I can say is that every conversation that I started, even if I got it wrong, was appreciated. I had, of course, few people that in the emails that I sent said, "Oh, you shouldn't be talking about this. You should do more." And I understand that in particular right now there is a lot of pain, there is a lot of hurt going around, and not just right now. I mean, it's talking about centuries. But I think that as a white person, we can't say this is not our problem because we created it. So we can't, if we talk about where it all came from colonialism, from all the things that happened that led us to this situation, we can't say it's not our problem, because if we are really talking about humanity, it is our problem as human beings. And as a white person, it is our problem because we created the damn thing. So in the first place. And it is important to have these conversations. And I've received many messages when I did different interviews. I did was one of the most beautiful moment where we have like an inner circle of clients, and we invited some of our Black members, say, just to share their feelings, say, how do you feel right now? And it was just a moment where which you would never create. I wish I've done it sooner, and I will do it more, to understand where we can understand each other cultures. We can understand how each others feel in certain environment, and the opportunity to create that safe space where no one is judged. And that's one of the things that I found that I really wish I've done sooner, because and if probably this the Black Lives Matter movement didn't explode this much, like this big in this particular time, I probably would have not have done it. So there is a lot of question, and one of the reason why I'm saying this, because one of the questions I have now is how do we keep this going when it's not mainstream anymore in the news? Like right now, it's easy to talk about this because it's everywhere. But what happens when it's not everywhere? What can we do as organizations or people to keep this conversation going and making a real change?
Yeah. So, yeah, and that's a great question. And actually, I'll start here. So, one of the things which I've actually struggled with in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement itself is, I just call it shaming, right? So there's sometimes a shaming attitude, for example. So I know I said communication is important, but at the same time, you need to allow people to process things and then communicate when they're ready. And I think initially when this whole thing was on fire, there were certain pockets of people who even like stopped focusing on the movement, and instead they were focusing on shaming those people who hadn't come out to talk about it, right? And I can see where that sentiment is coming from, but I also think that sentiment is not helpful, because at the end of the day, we need to respect our human differences.
Yeah.
So the way Simone processes something might be completely different to how Winston processes it. And actually, even after the George Floyd situation, I didn't post anything for about a week, because I actually think I was traumatized after. I didn't even watch the video to the end, but just watching a little bit, that I need to be off social media for a few days, right? And so to be attacked for processing trauma feels a little bit unfair, because you have to allow people that grace to do what they need to do. And yeah, and so coming back to your point about how do we make this sustainable, which I think links well into this, is I've got a calling to, and my calling hasn't changed. My mission has not changed because of Black Lives Matter. My mission has always been to, in fact, I've got a number. My mission is to help 1 billion people unleash their full human potential. And I'm sure you've got your mission statement. I'm sure many other people in your community and whoever's
Yeah.
watching this, they'll have their own personal missions as well. And so generally, our missions are to do with helping other people, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I think I'm not going to ask everyone who's watching this to now go and become an activist or to go and become a diversity and inclusion expert, because maybe that's not your expertise, or that's not the cause that you care about, right? But it's thinking, how can you, in whatever you do, pour into this racial inequality? And that could look like different things. So with me, obviously it's pretty easy. You know, I speak at conferences, and now, like, one thing I've added to my talk is a bigger focus on racial inequalities, because you know, that fits nicely with my topics. But you could be I've seen coaches, for example, who were offering, for example, people from minority groups taster sessions or consultations for them to have an experience of coaching which they would have never thought of accessing before, right? So this is businesses making their work available. I do, people also doing mentoring, right? So because I work with CEOs and with big companies, there are programs where a CEO could mentor someone from a socially deprived community. Now imagine you're 16 years old and you get to be mentored by a CEO of Barclays Bank for 3 months.
It
Right?
changes your life. It changes your
Life
life.
changing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that ghetto mentality, it just completely changes your perspective. Absolutely, 100%, right? And so, and we can all be that CEO. We can all help that person who's less fortunate, whether you're a speaker, whether you sell shoes, whether you're a coach, you know, whatever you do, is thinking, how can I, don't transform your mission, just reshape your mission so that it actually helps another group of people, because we all agree, generally, we're all trying to help each other.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's that's an incredible strong point that you make. Is about adding it to what you're already doing, not derailing yourself, not changing yourself, but is understanding, thinking about what else can I do. And I made a commitment to create more spaces for these conversations to happen where in our community, because we had for one reason or another, we had as GTeX a very diverse community. Like, I cannot really pinpoint something like that is crazy. It's a bit crazy. But I think that also aligns with the fact that that's one of my passion. Like, I love understanding different cultures. I'm just like, so what does it mean? And for me, it's fascinating. That's also why I love traveling, because it's less about the place, it's more about understanding how the people live in that place, and what they eat, what they don't eat, what they drink. That's one of the things that always fascinated me. And I've not done enough I've done enough on two things. One, I never talked about it publicly, because a lot of conversation around inclusion, diversity, they were done behind closed doors. So we talk about it on a board level. We talk about it when we think about the marketing that we want to put out, on how we make sure that people get the most of the programs. But we never actually voiced out the work that we were doing. And by not doing so, then we are actually taking a stance, uh, whether we like it or not. And so these are some of the things that we are committed to do, and I'm open to more and more suggestion on what else we can do, because I think if we use then this wave that have started, this momentum that has been built, then we can progress the change. Because of course I think we came a long way since like even like 50 years ago, 60 years ago, but there is still a long way to go. and and we all got to do our bit. So, Winston, I want to thank you for coming on this interview today. It's been incredibly eye-opening. Thank you for sharing your stories, your examples, your ideas. If someone wants to reach out to you, maybe they want to book you for a conference or in their organization, what is the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just thank you, Simone, for creating this safe space for people to share and people to just learn and educate themselves. You know, I guess I'll add one thing. So obviously, I'm disabled as well as Black, and so the this is interesting for me because I often get people who don't understand disability, just like people who don't understand what it is to be Black. And so it's good that we're starting to have these open conversations because I believe it's going to trickle to, you know, the disabled experience, the transgender experience, all the relevant forms of diversity. So thank you for creating that safe space. And then in terms of people reaching out to me, just winstonclements.com. It's got all my social handles, it's got my videos, my TED Talks, and yeah, just drop me a line, even just to say hi, or if you had a question following this awesome session with Simone.
All right, thank you very much. All the links are going to be in the show notes, so make sure you connect with Winston, even sending a message on social media, connect with him, get the conversation going. And now the final question before we wrap up, Winston, if there is one message you want to leave our listeners with, what would it be?
Okay, pressure. Can you tell me about this? I would say one thing that I've talked about before is, again, maybe comparing it with my experience as a disabled man. So, you know, we all know, for example, if you're a wheelchair user, there are certain challenges to just navigating the city, right? Accessing buildings, etc. I mean, you had to carry me up the stairs one time at a venue. So, you know, so we have those challenges. And, you know, there are things that we're doing to overcome that, to make buildings more accessible, etc. So the analogy I want to leave you with is these conversations that we're having, these safe spaces that you're creating, these the movement itself and how people are prepared to be anti-racist, people are prepared to be conscious about inclusion and help their mom, their grandma to be more aware. What we're doing is we're actually building that ramp. This was a building that used to have a staircase, so the disabled person couldn't go in. But now these conversations are creating that ramp. They're making it accessible for Black people and, to be honest, all humanity to live in a space that is fully inclusive. So I hope that analogy made sense. I just kind of made it up, but that's what I'd like to leave you guys with.
It absolutely works.
Be the ramp. Be the ramp.
be the ramp. Be the ramp. And with this, thank you very much, Winston. Thank you for your time. Everyone who is listening or watching, thank you very much for being part of this conversation. Let us know in the comments what are the things that you enjoyed the most or the ideas that you have. And as well, if you're listening to the show, leave us a review so then on iTunes, so then we can spread this word even to more and more people. And let us know in the review what stood out for you in this conversation. I'm sure Winston and myself would love to know that. Thank you, Winston. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day. And remember, until next time, that together we grow exponentially. Ciao.